What would you do if you were told you didn't belong in the very seat you paid for, while the whole world watched? This is the story of Dr. Althea Morgan, a brilliant black CEO who boarded a late-night flight expecting nothing more than peace and quiet, only to be humiliated by a flight attendant who crumpled her boarding pass and ordered her to the back. But instead of breaking down, Althea stood tall. What happened next turned a single act of cruelty into a global reckoning. How did a quiet woman in seat 2A bring an airline to its knees? Why did her calm refusal ignite a movement that politicians, investors, and everyday travelers could no longer ignore? And what does her story reveal about the hidden power we carry when dignity becomes non-negotiable? Stay with us, because what unfolded at 30,000 feet wasn't just about one flight. It was about every person who's ever been told they don't belong. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's step onto Flight 227 and witness the night silence was broken. The boarding door hummed as the final wave of passengers drifted into the first-class cabin of Atlantic Sky Flight 982. It was 7:44 p.m., just 11 minutes before departure, and the air inside the aircraft already carried that faint mixture of stale air conditioning and quiet anticipation. People fiddled with phones, tucked carry-ons into overhead bins, and tried to secure their place in the cocoon of plush leather seats before the long journey south. Dr. Althea Morgan adjusted the strap of her well-worn leather handbag and stepped carefully down the aisle. She wore dark jeans and a simple cream sweater, her hair pinned in a no-nonsense bun that revealed calm, unbothered eyes. Her boarding pass seat 2A rested lightly between her fingers. To anyone watching, she was just another traveler, but inside her chest, she carried the steady confidence of a woman used to boardrooms, government hearings, and leadership summits. She barely made it 3 steps into first class before the sharp voice cut across the quiet hum of the cabin. "Get out! You clearly don't belong here." The words came from Claudia Reeves, the senior flight attendant with perfectly pressed uniform and a practiced smile that now twisted into something sharper. She didn't wait for Althea to respond. With one sudden movement, Claudia snatched the boarding pass from Althea's hand and crumpled it like a scrap of trash. She let it fall at Althea's feet. "Pick it up," Claudia commanded, her tone rising loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. A hush spread. Conversation stalled. A businessman paused mid-sentence with his phone to his ear. An older woman in 2B tilted her silver head toward the commotion. Passengers craned their necks to see, whispering to each other with that mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Althea stared at the wrinkled slip of paper on the floor. Her heart pulsed hot in her chest, but her face remained composed. Slowly, deliberately, she bent down, retrieved the boarding pass, and smoothed it against her palm. "I think there's been a mistake," she said quietly. "The mistake," Claudia replied, her lips curling, "is you thinking you can afford this seat? You'll be moving to the back where you belong." The silence in the cabin grew heavier. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Althea stood still, refusing to be pushed back. But Claudia stepped closer, invading the space until Althea had no choice but to shift backward slightly. The humiliation cut deeper than the command itself, the way Claudia's voice dripped with satisfaction, the way she made a spectacle of dominance in front of strangers. From seat 3C, an 18-year-old named Jalen Brooks lifted his phone discreetly. "Y'all are not going to believe this," he whispered into his TikTok live stream. "They're about to kick this black woman out of first class for no reason." His viewer count jumped from 0 to 50 in seconds. "Let me see your ID," Claudia demanded, stretching out her hand like a detective collecting evidence. Althea's grip tightened on her handbag. A flicker of heat passed through her chest, the sting of being interrogated like a trespasser instead of a paying customer. But she exhaled slowly, reminding herself the discipline that had carried her through hostile negotiations and dismissive boardrooms. She handed over her driver's license. Claudia turned it under the overhead light, tilting it as if searching for forgeries. Althea Morgan, she read aloud, her voice skeptical. And you're telling me you paid for first class? I'm a platinum medallion member. Althea answered calmly. I've flown Atlantic Sky for years. Claudia smirked, then called over her shoulder. Eric, we have a situation. A younger male attendant, Eric Dawson, approached with furrowed brows. His expression already betrayed unease at Claudia's tone. She thrust the license at him. This woman claims she belongs in 2A, Claudia announced. Eric glanced at the documents, then at the boarding pass, his brow knit deeper. Claudia, her ticket clearly shows 2A. I know what I'm looking at, Claudia snapped. Something's not right. Jalen's stream spiked to over 300 viewers. Comments flooded his screen. This is disgusting. Call them out. Where's the manager at 7:47 p.m.? The gate agent's voice crackled over the intercom. Final boarding call for Atlantic Sky Flight 982. Doors closing in 8 minutes. Althea's phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from her corporate emergency line glowed on the screen. She tucked the phone back into her pocket without answering. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to wait here while I sort this out with my supervisor, Claudia ordered, crossing her arms to block the aisle. Of course, Althea said evenly, though her fingers pressed hard against the leather of her handbag. She felt the weight of eyes burning into her from every angle. Margaret Hale, the woman in 2B with the silver hair, leaned into the aisle. Excuse me, miss, she said firmly to Claudia. Oh, this is absolutely ridiculous. The woman has a ticket. Ma'am, please return to your seat, Claudia barked back. This doesn't concern you. Jalen's live stream jumped to over 1,000 viewers. At 7:48 p.m., Janet O'Connor, the purser with 20 years of service, approached. What's the holdup? She asked, her tone sharp but weary. This passenger is in the wrong seat, Claudia explained. She won't move to economy. Janet took the boarding pass, scanned it, then checked her tablet. Her expression shifted. Claudia, this shows Platinum Elite status. She's cleared for this seat. Claudia leaned closer, lowering her voice but not low enough. Look at her. Does she look like she can afford first class? The comments sliced through the cabin like a blade. Althea's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Jalen's stream hit 1,200 viewers. In the comments, someone identified the flight number. Another posted a screenshot of Claudia's name tag. At 7:49 p.m., Captain Luis Ramirez's voice filled the cabin. Flight attendants, prepare for departure in 6 minutes. We have a weather window we need to meet. Janet pulled Claudia aside, whispering urgent fragments Althea could catch discrimination complaint. Viral video. Corporate will have our heads. But Claudia's eyes glinted with stubborn pride. I know what I saw. She hissed. Her behavior, the way she's dressed. Something's off. I'm calling security. Althea's phone buzzed again. This time the screen lit with emergency board line. Dr. Morgan. Her thumb hovered over the accept button, but she declined again, determined to stay composed until the moment mattered most. In 1A, Daniel Whitman, a marketing VP, quietly angled his iPhone to record the interaction. He knew a PR disaster when he saw one. At 7:50 p.m., two TSA officers boarded the plane. Officer Thomas Vega, stocky, mid-40s, and Officer Naomi Carter, younger, with eyes that had seen too much. "What seems to be the problem?" Vega asked. "This passenger is refusing to move," Claudia said, voice now dripping with official weight. "She's becoming disruptive." Officer Carter examined Althea's documents. She gave the faintest shake of her head. "Ma'am," Vega said, "we're going to need you to cooperate, or we'll have to ask you to deplane." Althea rose slowly. Her movements were graceful, deliberate. She kept her voice steady. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job, but I am in the correct seat." Jalen's stream surged past 8,000 viewers. The hashtag Atlantic Sky Bias appeared in the comments. The hum of the plane grew louder, but the cabin itself was silent. Passengers shifted in discomfort. Everyone knew something was building. Althea looked at Claudia. Calm eyes, unblinking. She whispered to herself, just loud enough to hear patience. "Not yet. Let the storm show its face before you calm it." Her phone buzzed again. She slipped it into her hand, but this time she didn't press decline. "Not yet." The clock ticked toward 7:51. 4 minutes to departure, and the quiet power in Althea's presence had begun to unsettle everyone who had underestimated her. At 7:51 p.m., the cabin air felt heavier than recycled oxygen should ever feel. Passengers shifted in their seats as if the tension itself pressed down on their shoulders. Some whispered nervously, while others clutched phones, recording. The hum of the aircraft seemed to vibrate in sync with a collective pulse of unease. Althea Morgan remained standing, her boarding pass smoothed flat against her palm, her other hand resting lightly on the strap of her handbag. To anyone watching closely, her posture radiated composure, but inside, a storm brewed. Her mind replayed every humiliation she had endured across decades, the skeptical looks when she entered a boardroom, the doubt when she signed a contract worth billions, the subtle question marks in people's eyes that asked, "Are you sure you belong here?" She had learned to endure them all, to transform the sting into steel. Yet this felt different. This was public, visible, recorded in real time by strangers who might never know her name, but would witness her dignity under assault. Officer Vega repeated his words, more firmly this time. "Ma'am, we need your cooperation. If you continue to resist, you'll have to leave the aircraft." Althea inhaled, then let the breath slip out slow. She weighed her options. Compliance would mean surrendering not just her seat, but her dignity. Defiance risked escalation, handcuffs, headlines she did not control. But there was also the third path, the one she had been trained for. Quiet power, strategic timing, the art of letting others build their own downfall. "Officers," she said with even tone, "I am not resisting. I am simply in the seat I purchased." Claudia's voice rang out, cutting across the calm. She printed a fake boarding pass. "I've seen it before. They lie about their status all the time." The word spread like poison through the cabin. Gas rippled. Someone in business class shouted, "Let her sit down already." Another voice followed. "This is ridiculous." Jalen Brooks adjusted his phone, capturing Claudia's declaration. His live stream surged to 25,000 viewers in seconds. Comments cascaded across the screen. "Unbelievable! Fake boarding pass. She's clearly legit." Others posted screenshots of the flight number, tagging Atlantic Sky's official account. At 7:52 p.m., Althea's phone vibrated again. She glanced down at the caller ID, emergency board line. She pressed decline once more, her thumb trembling just slightly this time. Her silence wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. Timing mattered. Captain Luis Ramirez's iPad buzzed in the cockpit. A priority alert flashed. Possible PR incident in progress. Monitor cabin. Board chair may be aboard. His stomach dropped. He glanced at his first officer, eyes wide, then reached for the internal phone to stall departure. Back in the cabin. Claudia crossed her arms, savoring the authority she believed she wielded. She raised her voice for everyone to hear. You're delaying this entire flight. 200 people are being held up because you can't accept reality. Her attempt to sway the passengers backfired. Murmurs of frustration turned into open criticism. Just let her sit. We all saw the ticket. This is harassment. Althea stood steady. She felt every eye on her, the weight of expectation pressing in from strangers who wanted resolution. Yet inside her mind, doubt whispered. Should she have spoken earlier? Should she have revealed her authority before humiliation reached this height? She pictured her late father, a civil rights attorney who had taught her patience as a weapon. Never swing first. Althea, let them strike. Then the world will see who they are. Officer Carter stepped closer. Her kind eyes flickered with recognition of injustice. Ma'am, she said softly, almost in confidence, is there someone we can call to verify your status? Althea's phone rang again. This time, she answered. She held the phone close, her voice steady but laced with restrained power. This is Dr. Althea Morgan? Yes. Implement Code 7 protocol on Atlantic Sky Flight 982. Immediately. The words carried across the cabin. A hush fell over every row. The call lasted 37 seconds. Her tone never rose above conversational, but each syllable landed like a gavel. Understood. Full implementation. Thank you. She ended the call, slipped the phone into her bag, and looked directly at Claudia. This will be resolved momentarily, Claudia sneered, though the flicker of doubt had begun to erode her certainty. Make all the calls you want. Security is here. You're still getting off this plane. Officer Vega shifted uncomfortably. His instincts tugged between authority and unease. Officer Carter's gaze lingered on Althea, sensing the quiet storm beneath her composure. Jalen's stream surged to 40,000 viewers. Comments exploded. Who did she just call? Code 7. This is about to get serious. At 7:53 p.m., Captain Ramirez's voice cracked through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a brief operational delay. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Passengers groaned. Anxiety rippled through the cabin. A woman in economy wept quietly about missing her daughter's rehearsal dinner. A man in row 12 cursed loudly about his connection. Claudia seized the opportunity. See, this is because of her. She's disrupting operations. She gestured toward Althea, her voice amplified for maximum effect. But Althea did not flinch. She pulled her phone from her bag again, scrolling with practiced precision through a directory labeled Board Communications. Her thumb hovered over contacts that could summon executives, legal teams, regulators. For years she had carried this power quietly, using it only when absolutely necessary. Tonight was that moment. Daniel Whitman in 1A leaned forward, recording discreetly. He caught a glimpse of Althea's screen, Atlantic Sky Corporate Emergency Response, board level. His eyes widened. He knew a board-level intervention when he saw one. At 7:54 p.m., Patricia Lynn, the ground operations manager at JFK, boarded the plane with urgent strides. Her presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Petite but commanding, her iPad clutched tightly. She scanned the cabin until her eyes found Althea. "Where is Doctor?" Morgan Patricia demanded, her voice sharp with recognition. Janet blinked. Who's asking? What is this about? Patricia ignored her and moved directly toward Althea, bypassing Claudia entirely. Dr. Morgan, Patricia said with deliberate respect. I need to speak with you immediately. The name rang through the cabin like a thunderclap. Claudia froze, confusion twisting her face. Wait, who is she? Patricia turned sharply. Step back from Dr. Morgan, now! The tension snapped. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, whispering, gasping. Jalen's live stream crossed 50,000 viewers. Comments filled with speculation. Who is she? Why is management calling her doctor? Althea met Patricia's gaze and nodded with recognition. I assume you've been briefed. Patricia nodded, her expression grave. Yes, I have. The room seemed to shift in that instant. Claudia's dominance evaporated. Her colleagues edged away, unwilling to be seen standing beside her. Even Officer Vega stepped back. Inside, Althea felt a flicker of emotion she rarely allowed herself. Not triumph, but sadness. Sadness that her dignity had to be proven by title and authority instead of being respected as a human right. Patricia held up her iPad, showing a priority alert. The message was clear. Board chair confirmed on board. Incident under live review. Immediate compliance required. Claudia's face drained of color. Board chair. That can't be true. Althea's calm voice finally broke the silence. Claudia, I think it is time you understood exactly who I am. She reached into her handbag, retrieved a platinum business card case, and pulled out a single card. She handed it to Claudia, who took it with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the print once, twice. The card slipped from her fingers, landing on the carpet. Officer Carter bent down and read it aloud. Dr. Althea Morgan, Chairwoman, Board of Directors, Atlantic Sky Airlines. The words detonated in the cabin. A wave of gas, murmurs, disbelief swept through the passengers. Jalen's stream rocketed to 60,000 viewers. Screenshots of the card exploded across social media in real time. Claudia's voice cracked, barely a whisper. You're the board chair I am, Althea answered simply, and I have held the position for 3 years. The balance of power flipped in a heartbeat, and every eye in the cabin now turned not to Claudia, not to the officers, but to the woman she had tried to humiliate. The silence that followed was unlike any Althea had ever experienced. It was the kind of silence that doesn't empty a room, but fills it, heavy and unavoidable. Claudia stood frozen, her lips parted but unable to form words. Her fingers twitched as if they wanted to snatch back the card from the floor, erase the evidence, reverse time. But the truth was already out. Officer Carter picked up the business card and handed it back to Althea with quiet respect. Dr. Morgan, she said softly, almost reverently. Even her partner Vega straightened. His earlier authority dissolved into discomfort. Claudia tried to laugh, a brittle sound that cracked in her throat. You could have said something earlier. How was I supposed to know? Althea's gaze was steady, her voice calm but edged with steel. That is exactly the point. You treated me poorly because you thought you could. You believed I was powerless. You did not see a human being deserving respect. You saw a stereotype, a target, and now you see your mistake. The words struck harder than any raised voice could have. Claudia's posture faltered. Her bravado melted into something smaller, almost pitiful. Jalen Brooks's phone shook slightly as he struggled to hold it steady. His stream had passed 70,000 viewers. Comments flooded the screen. She's the board chair. Claudia's finished. This is history in the making. Passengers murmured among themselves, disbelief mingling with indignation. Margaret Hale in 2B leaned into the aisle, her silver hair glinting under the cabin lights. "I've been flying for 60 years, she said aloud, her voice firm, "and I have never seen a passenger treated so disgracefully. You should be ashamed." Claudia flinched as though struck. For the first time, her eyes darted around, searching for allies among her crew. But Eric Dawson had retreated to the galley, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Janet O'Connor, the purser, stood rigid, her face pale with dawning realization of what complicity might cost her. At 8, Althea's phone rang again. This time she answered on speaker, her voice still measured, her words carrying the quiet authority of inevitability. "This is Dr. Morgan." The voice on the other end was urgent, male, broadcast through the cabin loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Dr. Morgan, this is Jonathan Price, Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Sky. I am calling from headquarters in Atlanta with our full executive team present." The cabin gasped as if a collective breath had been stolen. Claudia's knees buckled slightly. She gripped the headrest of seat 2A to steady herself. "Jonathan," Althea replied evenly, "I am implementing Code 7 protocol as discussed in our last board session. We are dealing with a discrimination incident live-streamed to over 80,000 viewers. I will require full support." "Understood," the COO said immediately. "You have complete authority to resolve this as you see fit. Our legal team is standing by. HR is prepared for immediate action. Communications is ready to implement your directives. Every passenger in first class could hear every word." Jalen tilted his phone to capture the audio clearly. His live stream viewership ticked past 90,000, then 95, then 100,000. Claudia's face drained of color. Her lips moved soundlessly, as if searching for the right words. But nothing emerged. She was no longer the accuser. She was the accused, standing under the harshest spotlight imaginable. Althea spoke into the phone, her words deliberate. "Jonathan, I want a complete review of employee training protocols, mandatory bias recognition training for all customer-facing staff within 60 days, an anonymous reporting system for discrimination incidents, quarterly audits of passenger complaints with demographic analysis, and most importantly, a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. No warnings, no retraining for repeat offenders, immediate termination." The CEO's response was swift. "Consider it done. Dr. Morgan, we will have the framework drafted within the hour or an implementation ready within 30 days. Claudia staggered back a step. Her voice came out cracked, desperate. "This isn't fair." "I didn't know." "How could I have known?" Althea turned her eyes on her, calm but unyielding. "You did not need to know who I was to treat me with respect. That is the standard. That has always been the standard. And tonight, you failed it." The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Some passengers clapped softly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Daniel Whitman, in 1A, the VP of Marketing, muttered into his phone while typing furiously. He had witnessed corporate crises before, but never at 30,000 feet, never with a board chair at the center. At 8:03 p.m., Althea's phone buzzed again. This time the call was from the airline's legal counsel. She answered on speaker, "Dr. Morgan, this is Victoria Chen, General Counsel. We have been monitoring the live stream. Preliminary analysis shows potential violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, Section 42127 of the Federal Aviation Act, and multiple breaches of our own code of conduct." Claudia's breath hitched audibly. Her face was pale, her jaw slack. Althea's tone remained steady. "What is our liability exposure conservatively?" Victoria replied. 15 to 25 million in potential lawsuits, 50 to 75 million in regulatory fines, and incalculable reputational damage. This qualifies as a Category 5 crisis event. The words landed like a verdict. Claudia sank into the empty seat across the aisle, burying her face in her hands. Jalen's stream hit 105,000 viewers. Comments scrolled so fast they were unreadable. Screenshots flew across Twitter and Instagram. Hashtags Zeer Atlantic Sky and Soar der Morgen trending simultaneously. News outlets picked up the feed. CNN producers were scrambling. NBC had a breaking news banner ready. At 8:05 p.m., Patricia Lynn held up her iPad for Althea to see. "Dr. Morgan, the board has convened an emergency session. They are on the line." Althea nodded and pressed accept. The voices of 12 board members filled the cabin, audible to every passenger and to the live stream audience. "Dr. Morgan," one said, "we authorize full implementation of your discrimination response protocol. You have our unanimous support." Another voice added, "We are allocating $50 million immediately to fund training, monitoring, and victim compensation." Gas filled the cabin. The sheer scale of the response was unprecedented. Althea lowered her phone. Her eyes swept the rows of passengers, meeting their gazes one by one. She spoke not as a victim, but as a leader. "What you have witnessed tonight is not about me alone. It is about every passenger who has ever been doubted, dismissed, or demeaned because of assumptions. Tonight, we end that cycle. Tonight, we implement change that will protect every person who steps onto one of our planes." Applause broke out, soft at first, then swelling until it filled the cabin. Even in economy, passengers clapped, their frustration transformed into solidarity. Claudia lifted her head, tears streaking her face. "Am I fired?" she whispered. Althea regarded her quietly. "That decision will go through proper HR channels, but your behavior tonight violated multiple policies and federal regulations. You will be held accountable." Patricia Lynn recorded every word, her stylus flying across her tablet. Margaret Hale leaned forward again, her voice gentle but firm. "Dr. Morgan, you handled this with grace I haven't seen in years. Thank you." Althea inclined her head. "Thank you, ma'am. But grace alone doesn't change systems. Policies do. Accountability does. That is what we will deliver." Jalen's live stream passed 110,000 viewers. The comments shifted from outrage to admiration. This is leadership. This is how you dismantle discrimination. As the minutes passed, Althea felt the weight in her chest begin to ease, not because she had proven her authority, but because she had turned humiliation into an opportunity for systemic change. She thought of her father again, his voice reminding her that dignity is not given, it is demanded, and once demanded, it must be defended for everyone, not just yourself. At 8:10, she spoke once more into the cabin microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience. I know this delay has disrupted your evening, but I promise you, what we have done tonight will protect millions of passengers in the future. Sometimes progress requires inconvenience. Sometimes dignity requires delay." The ovation that followed was louder than before, rolling down the aisles, uniting first class, business, and economy in a single sound. And Claudia, once the loudest voice in the cabin, sat in silence, her career crumbling in the shadow of her own arrogance. The cabin was quieter now, but it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of an audience leaning forward, waiting to see how history would unfold in front of them. Dr. Althea Morgan stood in the aisle, steady as if the entire aircraft were her boardroom. Her voice was not raised, yet every syllable carried the weight of command. "Tonight," she began, "we are not just correcting one injustice. We are correcting a system that has allowed injustices to continue unchecked." Claudia Reeves sat slumped in the empty seat across the aisle. Her cheeks were blotched. Her hands trembled. She kept her eyes down as though afraid to meet the gaze of the passengers she had once lorded over. At 8:12 p.m., Althea's phone rang again. She pressed speaker, making sure the entire cabin heard. "Dr. Morgan," said a firm voice. "This is Linda Monroe, Director of Human Resources. We are reviewing the personnel file of Miss Reeves now." Passengers stirred, even those in economy, straining to hear through the hushed repetition of events traveling down the aisles, realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Althea's voice remained composed. "Linda, how many formal complaints has this employee faced in the last 18 months?" Linda hesitated, then answered, 47. "Dr. Morgan, 23 related to racial profiling, 31 involving derogatory comments toward passengers of color, 8 specific to socioeconomic insults. Most were marked unresolved or closed without action." A low murmur rippled through the cabin. The number was staggering. Claudia finally lifted her head, eyes wide with disbelief. "That can't be right. Half of those were exaggerations. None of it was proven." Althea regarded her calmly. "What matters is the pattern, and patterns tell stories that individuals would rather ignore." Jalen Brooks' live stream surged past 115,000 viewers. His comments section exploded with outrage. People posted screenshots of the statistics as though they were headlines already. Linda continued, her voice steady but heavy. "Based on the evidence, Dr. Morgan, HR is recommending immediate termination with cause. We are also preparing to open a full audit of complaint handling procedures at JFK and other hubs." "Thank you," Althea said simply. She ended the call and slipped her phone into her bag. The moment was not about vengeance. It was about clarity. Every passenger could see the line being drawn between old failures and new accountability. Margaret Hale reached out from seat 2B, her voice warm but firm. "Dr. Morgan, I have seen many leaders in my years. The way you are handling this is something my grandchildren will learn from. Thank you." Althea nodded slightly, but her eyes were tired. She thought of her own daughter back in Boston, of how many times she had worried about the world her child would inherit. Maybe tonight, she thought, was one step toward a better one. At 8:14 p.m., her phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID showed the chief financial officer, Alan Greer. She answered, once again allowing the call to play on speaker for transparency. "Dr. Morgan," Alan said, "we are tracking financial impact in real time. Social media sentiment has plummeted from plus 60% to under 25. Our stock price dropped 2.7% within the first 15 minutes of the live stream. Current estimate, $120 million in brand damage." The passengers gasped. Even Daniel Whitman in 1A, the Fortune 500 marketing executive, looked shaken. He mouthed the number to himself, as if trying to process the scale. Althea's expression was unflinching. "Alan, what are we seeing now?" After the board's announcement, Alan's voice brightened. "Stock is already recovering. Sentiment is climbing. CNBC is running the headline, 'Atlantic Sky takes bold. Stand on discrimination.' Our investors are praising decisive action. The cost of inaction would have been catastrophic. Your intervention is stabilizing the company in real time. Jalen's stream hit 120,000 viewers. Comments scrolled. She saved the airline. This is how leaders act, Claudia whispered. All because of me, Althea looked at her steadily. Not because of you, because of choices. You made yours. Now the company is making ours. The cabin fell into another thoughtful silence. Passengers were no longer restless about the delay. They were transfixed. The humiliation of one woman had become a moment of transformation for an entire industry. At 8:16 p.m., Althea dialed another number. "This is Dr. Morgan," she said when the line connected. "I need the training department immediately." A brisk voice answered. "Dr. Morgan. This is Claire Thompson, head of corporate training. We are on standby." "Claire, effective immediately. I want Protocol 7 training modules deployed. Every employee, from baggage handlers to executives, will complete 40 hours of bias recognition and de-escalation training within 60 days. Partner with Harvard Center for Bias Research and the Southern Poverty Law Center. I want the most comprehensive program in aviation history." "Yes, Dr. Morgan," Claire said. Her tone carried both urgency and awe. Claudia groaned softly, burying her face in her hands again. The enormity of what her actions had triggered was too much to process. Jalen angled his phone toward Althea. His live stream showed viewers a poised black woman, jeans and a sweater, standing in first class while commanding the future of an airline with nothing but her voice and her calm authority. The comment feed was a flood of admiration. "She is rewriting the rules. This is history." Althea closed her eyes for a brief moment. Her father's words echoed in her memory. Dignity is not given. It is demanded. She had never understood how much it cost to demand it until now. At 8:18 p.m., Patricia Lynn, the ground operations manager, approached holding her iPad. "Dr. Morgan, the immediate policy timeline is ready for your approval." Althea read aloud for the cabin to hear. "Effective tonight at midnight. All employees involved in passenger disputes will wear body cameras. AI-powered language monitoring will flag discriminatory remarks in real time. Anonymous reporting systems will guarantee responses within 24 hours. Within 48 hours, every gate, aircraft, and service center will display Dignity First signage and QR codes for direct reporting." Passengers nodded, murmuring their approval. Some even clapped again. "Within 1 week," Althea continued, "an external audit will review all customer service interactions from the last 12 months to identify discriminatory patterns." The sense in the cabin shifted again, from shock to pride. Passengers realized they were part of a story that would ripple far beyond this flight. Claudia finally raised her head. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of arrogance. "Please, Dr. Morgan, I have children. I need this job." Althea's gaze softened, but her tone remained steady. "Rebecca, I have compassion for your family, but accountability matters. Your children need a mother who treats people with dignity. Tonight you failed them as much as you failed these passengers." Tears slid down Claudia's face. She nodded weakly, the fight gone from her completely. At 8:20 p.m., Althea turned to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience. This delay has cost you time, but what you witnessed tonight will save countless others from indignity in the future. Progress often arrives through disruption. Tonight, you were part of that progress." The ovation that followed shook the cabin. People in economy clapped. People in business class clapped. Even Officer Vega, still by the door, clapped slowly, his eyes lowered in respect. Jalen's live stream passed 125,000 viewers. Comments surged. This is bigger than one airline. She's changing the game. Althea sank slowly into her seat, her body heavy but her mind sharp. She had not sought this confrontation, but she knew it would be remembered as the night an airline chose dignity over silence. And as the engines hummed in preparation for takeoff, she whispered to herself, "Individual victories are temporary. Institutional change is permanent." The minutes ticked past departure, yet not a single passenger complained anymore. Phones glowed across the cabin as news outlets began pushing notifications. By now, everyone on board understood they were sitting in the middle of a breaking story. "Doctor..." Althea Morgan leaned back slightly in seat 2A, her composure unbroken. Her phone buzzed with another call, this one labeled legal. She pressed speaker so all could hear. "Dr. Morgan," came the crisp voice of Margaret Stone. "General Counsel, we have been monitoring the live stream and internal reports. Tonight's incident raises violations under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, Section 40127 of the Federal Aviation Act, and multiple breaches of our corporate code. Our preliminary liability assessment is $15 to $25 million in lawsuits, plus potential federal fines upwards of $70 million. Gas echoed through the cabin. Even seasoned travelers looked stricken by the numbers. Althea's reply was measured. "Margaret, what steps are we taking now? We are drafting public statements, initiating immediate suspension procedures, and preparing compliance documents for the FOA. But the real shield, Dr. Morgan, is the systematic response you are implementing in real time. Regulators are already noting it as precedent-setting." Jalen Brooks shifted in his seat, holding his phone steady. His live stream counter surged again, 130,000 viewers. Comments scrolled faster than his eyes could follow. "She's rewriting corporate law live. FAA watching now. This is history." Claudia Reeves sat with her head down, her shoulders heaving as she tried to keep silent. The proud tilt of her chin was gone. She looked more like someone awaiting a verdict than an employee still in uniform. At 8:25 p.m., Althea's phone vibrated with a text. She read it silently, then looked toward Patricia Lynn, the ground operations manager, still standing close. "Patricia, the board has authorized a $200 million budget for bias prevention over the next 2 years, effective immediately." Patricia's eyes widened. She tapped rapidly on her iPad, documenting every instruction. Passengers around her exchanged incredulous looks. They had boarded expecting a routine flight to Atlanta. Instead, they were watching the allocation of one of the largest corporate budgets ever devoted to civil rights reform. Margaret Hale in 2B leaned closer to Althea. "My dear, when I was a girl, we marched for rights that seemed impossible to secure. To see you here, turning humiliation into transformation, it makes me believe the struggle was worth it." Althea allowed herself a small smile. "The struggle is never over, Margaret. It only changes form." Her phone rang again. This time the caller ID displayed Board of Directors emergency session. She tapped speaker. A chorus of voices filled the cabin. "Dr. Morgan," said James Wu, senior board member. "We are authorizing immediate enforcement of your proposed zero-tolerance policy. Full disciplinary action, mandatory retraining, and public accountability measures are approved unanimously." Another voice, Sarah Delgado, added, "We are also approving the $50 million emergency fund for victim compensation, monitoring technology, and external audits." The murmurs among passengers turned into quiet applause. Even those in economy could hear the authority of 12 powerful voices bending toward reform. Claudia's face crumpled. She whispered again, "I didn't know who you were." Althea's reply was gentle but unwavering. That's the point. Claudia, you shouldn't need to know someone's title to treat them with respect. Dignity is not conditional. At 8:28 p.m., Daniel Whitman in 1A raised his phone, displaying a headline from a major news app. CNN is already running the story. The headline reads, Atlantic Sky confronts discrimination at 30,000 feet board chair leads reform live. Passengers murmured in disbelief. They were living inside a headline, their faces already part of a news cycle spreading worldwide. Jalen tilted his phone so his viewers could see. You hear that, CNN? Y'all, this is bigger than anything I've ever seen. Dr. Morgan just changed an entire company mid-flight. His comments scrolled. This is what leadership looks like. Imagine if every company did this. Althea's phone buzzed again. A priority alert from Communications Director Hannah Lee. She read aloud. Dr. Morgan, major networks request interviews. Stock price has not only recovered, but is up 1.9% since your reforms were announced. She turned to the passengers. You see, accountability does not destroy companies. It strengthens them. When leadership chooses dignity, trust returns. The applause that followed was louder this time. Rolling down the aisles, passengers and economy clapped and cheered. Their frustration about the delay transformed into pride. Claudia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What happens to me now? She asked softly. Althea looked at her, compassion flickering beneath the steel. You will have a choice. Claudia, immediate resignation with a neutral reference, or full termination for cause that will follow you in every background check. But know this, the purpose of what we are doing tonight is not to destroy you. It is to prevent future harm. Claudia gave a trembling nod. Her voice broke. Then I resign. Patricia Lynn stepped forward with her iPad. Within seconds, Claudia's digital signature sealed her resignation. 15 years of service ended in silence, witnessed by 135,000 people online. At 8:32 p.m., Althea rose again, addressing the cabin through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We have delayed your journey, but we have also begun another kind of journey, one toward fairness, accountability, and dignity. Discrimination thrives in silence, but it dies in the light. Jalen's livestream viewers passed 140,000. Comments filled the screen. Best flight ever. She's teaching the world. In seat 12C, a young woman began to cry quietly, moved by the weight of what she had witnessed. A man across the aisle handed her a tissue, whispering, We'll tell our kids about this. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Alvarez received another update on his tablet. He glanced at his first officer, eyes wide. The FAA is watching the stream. They're calling this a model of crisis leadership. Back in first class. Althea's phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID read Federal Aviation Administration Civil Rights Division. She answered calmly, as though she had expected it. Dr. Morgan, the voice said, we are formally acknowledging your leadership tonight. We will be recommending aspects of your reforms as federal guidance for the entire airline industry. A wave of astonishment swept through the cabin. Margaret Hale pressed her hand to her chest. My dear Lord, she whispered. Althea's eyes closed for a moment. She felt the weight of responsibility, heavier than any insult or humiliation she had endured that night. But she also felt something else, Hope. Thank you, she told the voice on the line. This is not about me. This is about every passenger who deserves dignity. The call ended, but the echo of its implications remained. At 8:32 p.m., Althea returned to her seat. She looked around the cabin, meeting the eyes of strangers who were no longer strangers. They were witnesses, allies, participants in change. Jalen lowered his phone for the first time in half an hour. "Dr. Morgan," he said softly, "I don't think I'll ever forget this. You just showed me what power looks like when it's used for good." Althea gave him a small nod. Power means nothing if it doesn't protect the vulnerable. The hum of the engines grew louder as the aircraft prepared once again for departure. But passengers knew they had already traveled somewhere extraordinary into a future where one woman's refusal to be diminished had reshaped an entire industry. By the time the aircraft sat motionless for 35 minutes, passengers knew they were not merely delayed travelers. They were participants in an unfolding drama already echoing across the nation. The hum of phones, the steady buzz of incoming notifications, and the occasional gasp or whisper wove together into a tense but reverent silence. Dr. Althea Morgan sat poised in seat 2A, scrolling her phone as if reading a dinner menu instead of the torrent of legal, corporate, and political updates streaming across her screen. Yet beneath her calm expression, a storm raged. She remembered the sting of Rebecca's hand crumpling her boarding pass earlier, the cruel words dripping with contempt. She had told herself she was beyond humiliation, that decades in boardrooms and on Wall Street had thickened her skin. But the truth was harder. Even now, a part of her wondered if she would ever stop being seen first through the lens of prejudice rather than personhood. Her thoughts were interrupted by Daniel Whitman in 1A clearing his throat. His voice carried the measured tone of someone used to making presentations. "Dr. Morgan, if I may," he began. "I've been in corporate communications for 2 decades. I've managed crises that destroyed companies, and I've seen leaders fold under the weight of scrutiny. What you've done here, in real time, is beyond extraordinary. You turned an incident that could have been a disaster into an opportunity for systemic reform. I hope you understand that what we've witnessed will be studied for years." Applause rippled through the first-class cabin. Passengers in economy strained to hear, holding their phones higher to catch the sound. Jalen Brooks angled his phone to capture Daniel's words for the 145,000 viewers now tuned in. Althea inclined her head slightly. "Thank you, Daniel. But this isn't about extraordinary leadership. It's about ordinary expectations. Every passenger should be able to sit in the seat they paid for without being questioned, doubted, or demeaned. That is not a luxury, it is a right." From the row behind, Margaret Hale's silver head appeared once again in the aisle. Her voice quavered, but carried undeniable strength. "I'd like to testify," she said, surprising herself with the word. "When I saw this young woman, Dr. Morgan, being spoken to like a criminal, I thought of my own granddaughter. She's 17. She's brilliant. She wants to be a pilot. But she's also black. And I realized, if she faced what I saw here, she might lose faith in herself before she even had the chance to take flight. That's why this matters, not just for one passenger, but for generations." Tears shimmered in her eyes. A murmur of assent swept through the cabin. Even Officer Johnson, still standing discreetly near the galley, blinked hard against the emotion. Claudia Reeves, sitting slumped across the aisle, covered her face with her hands. Every testimony seemed like another nail in the coffin of her old life. For years she had wielded authority like a weapon, certain her judgments would be shielded by the anonymity of uniform and policy. But anonymity had evaporated the moment Althea's name was revealed. Now she was exposed. And worse, confronted by the real people harmed by her casual cruelties. At 8:38 p.m., Jalen's phone lit up with a flood of comments. One read, "I'm in Atlanta Airport right now. CNN just broke the story live. People are cheering at the gate." Another said, "FAA just tweeted that reforms are being monitored." His viewers surpassed 150,000, a number so staggering he couldn't wrap his teenage mind around it. He whispered to his stream, "This is history. Y'all, history." Then, unexpectedly, a man from economy rose. He was tall, middle-aged, dressed in a faded hoodie. "Excuse me," he called softly, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to say something." The cabin fell quiet again. "My name is Robert Fields," he continued. "I work construction. I've flown maybe 6 times in my whole life, but every single time, without fail, I've been stopped, questioned, treated like I didn't belong. Once, a gate agent asked if I was sure I was in the right terminal, like I'd wandered in by mistake. I never complained. I just swallowed it, because what could I do tonight? Dr. Morgan, you showed me what it looks like to stop swallowing it, and I want to thank you, for me and for my kids, who will see this video one day." Applause burst out again, louder this time, flowing from economy to business to first. For a moment the cabin felt less like an aircraft and more like a courtroom where witnesses were reclaiming their dignity, one statement at a time. Althea's heart tightened. She wanted to stand and hug Robert, to tell him she understood. Instead, she steadied her voice. "Thank you, Robert. You are exactly why these reforms matter, because no passenger should ever feel small simply for existing in a space they paid to enter." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a video call from Atlantic Sky's Diversity and Inclusion Council. Their faces filled her screen, a mosaic of concerned leaders. One of them, Aisha Thompson, spoke. "Dr. Morgan, we've been following every moment. We are drafting an industry-wide open letter tonight. Other airlines are already reaching out to adopt your protocols." Althea nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility deepening. She had wanted reform, yes, but she hadn't anticipated the speed at which her actions would reverberate. A single confrontation had detonated into a movement. For a fleeting second, she felt a pang of fear. Was she prepared for this? Could she carry not just the humiliation she'd endured, but also the hopes of millions who would now expect her to safeguard their dignity? Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to breathe evenly. She had always believed leadership wasn't about certainty. It was about courage in the face of doubt. Jalen whispered to his audience, "She looks so calm, but I can see it in her eyes. She's carrying the weight of the whole world right now." At 8:42 p.m., Captain Alvarez made another announcement. His voice, once brisk and authoritative, was now deferential. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We remain on the ground while company leadership finalizes protocols. We thank you for your patience. Tonight, you are part of a moment that will shape our industry." The words sent another ripple through the passengers. They were no longer just travelers. They were witnesses, collaborators in change. Claudia lifted her head. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her once pristine uniform rumpled. "Dr. Morgan," she said in a trembling voice, "I know nothing I say will undo what I did. But please, please don't let my mistake ruin everything I've built for my family. I was blind. I was cruel. I thought my authority protected me, but I see now that I was small." The plea hung in the air. Althea studied her, the calm mask never slipping, though inside she felt a pull of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to dismiss Claudia outright, to let justice roll over her without pause. But another part, the doctor, the leader, the woman who had faced her own failings, recognized the fragile seed of contrition. "Claudia," she said softly, "accountability is not cruelty. It is the only soil in which growth can take root. What happens next is not about vengeance. It's about ensuring no one else suffers as I did tonight." Claudia nodded miserably, tears dripping onto her uniform. For the first time in years, she felt utterly powerless, and strangely, she knew that was exactly what she needed to feel in order to change. At 8:45 p.m., Hannah Lee from Communications texted again. Althea read the message aloud. "Dr. Morgan, your handling of this incident is already being called the Morgan Protocol by journalists online." The cabin erupted in applause. Jalen tilted his phone. "You all heard it. They're naming it after her. The Morgan Protocol." His comment stream exploded with hashtags: Morgan Protocol, Dignity First, Justice at Altitude. For the first time that evening, Althea allowed herself a small laugh. It was brief, almost fragile, but it rippled through the passengers like sunlight through a storm cloud. She rose again, voice carrying through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your testimonies, your patience, and your courage. Tonight is not the end of something. It is the beginning." The plane, though still on the ground, felt like it was already soaring. By 8:50 p.m., the aircraft's cabin had shifted from simmering chaos into something that felt almost surreal. It was no longer just a delayed flight. It was a broadcast stage. Every buzz of a phone confirmed the same truth the world was watching. Jalen Brooks glanced at his live stream count and nearly dropped his phone. Over 170,000 viewers. His voice cracked with awe. "Guys, this is insane. CNN just joined the stream. NBC too. We've got verified journalists in the comments." He angled his phone toward Dr. Althea Morgan. She sat upright in 2A, her posture regal despite the casual sweater and jeans she wore. She looked like a woman who had been forced into the spotlight, yet carried it as if it had always been hers. Althea kept her phone face down on the armrest, trying to still her thoughts. Every moment reminded her of the sting of Rebecca's command. "Pick it up. Move to the back where you belong." Those words had cut sharper than any boardroom insult. They had reduced her, for a moment, to a caricature shaped by prejudice, and yet, now she was being elevated into something else, a beacon. The transition was dizzying. Her internal voice whispered, "You didn't ask to be a symbol. You just wanted to sit in your seat." But there was no undoing it. Across the cabin, Daniel Whitman scrolled through news updates, his corporate instincts kicking in. "Dr. Morgan," he said carefully. The Wall Street Journal just pushed a breaking headline. "Board chair confronts airline discrimination at 30,000 feet. Your name is front page. They're calling this a watershed moment." Althea inhaled slowly. She had spent years crafting strategy for companies, guiding others through reputational crises. But she had never imagined being at the center of one, her face plastered across news alerts while she still sat inside the scene of the crime. Patricia Lynn, the ground supervisor, rushed back down the aisle, her iPad vibrating with constant notifications. "Dr. Morgan, I just spoke with Atlanta headquarters. The FAA has requested immediate updates. Lawmakers are tagging the incident online." Representative Collins tweeted that this flight should never have left the gate without accountability. Passengers murmured. Some lifted their phones to read the tweet aloud. The very thought of congressmen weighing in on their specific flight gave the cabin a strange, electric energy. At 8:53 p.m., Jalen's stream hit 200,000 viewers. Comments flew faster than he could read. She's handling this with such grace. Congress is watching. This is bigger than Delta now, industry-wide reform incoming. Althea stared at her folded hands. Outwardly, she projected calm. Inwardly, she wrestled with the weight of expectation. She thought of her father, a postal worker who had once told her, "If the world ever puts you on a stage you didn't ask for, use it to say something that matters." Am I ready for this, she wondered. What if I falter? What if I say the wrong thing and the movement collapses under my hesitation? Her throat tightened. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, steadying herself with quiet breath. When she opened them again, she met the gaze of Margaret Hale, the elderly passenger in 2B. Margaret's expression radiated trust, almost grandmotherly pride. It was as if she were silently telling her, "You're not carrying this alone." The reassurance steadied Althea's heartbeat. At 8:55 p.m., the intercom crackled. This time it wasn't the captain. It was a voice patched in from headquarters. Crisp, male, official. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Charles Whitfield, Chief Operating Officer of Atlantic Sky. We are monitoring the situation closely. Dr. Morgan, the board is convening an emergency session. Please confirm if you wish to take the call live." All eyes turned to her. Even Claudia Reeves, now slumped in defeat, looked up with hollow eyes. Althea pressed the intercom button. "Yes, patch it through." Her phone lit up instantly with a secure line. She placed it on speaker so the cabin could hear. A chorus of board members filled the space, their voices overlapping before one cut through. "Dr. Morgan, we are authorizing you to implement immediate reforms under full emergency authority. The nation is watching. We trust your leadership," Jalen whispered to his audience. "Y'all, she has emergency powers right now. This is crazy." His viewership surged past 220,000. But as the weight of those words sank in, Althea felt a hollow pang inside. Emergency authority. It sounded like triumph, but to her it felt like a cage. With authority came expectation, and expectation brought isolation. She wasn't simply correcting an injustice anymore. She was rewriting an industry in real time. She lifted the phone closer. "Understood," she said. Her voice never wavered, though inside, fear licked at her resolve. At 8:57 p.m., Hannah Lee, the communications director, texted Patricia again. Patricia read aloud. "Dr. Morgan, hashtags Morgan Protocol and Sky Dignity are now trending worldwide. CNN panelists are calling this a turning point for civil rights in aviation. Rival airlines are scrambling to issue statements of solidarity." Passengers gasped. Some clapped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Claudia let out a choked sob. "I didn't know," she murmured again. But this time no one looked at her. The story had outgrown her. She was no longer the center. She was a cautionary footnote. At 9:30 p.m., the cabin lights flickered briefly as ground control synced with the plane's systems. The captain's voice returned, steady but reverent. "Dr. Morgan, ground control is awaiting your authorization for departure. Shall we proceed?" Althea hesitated. Her gaze swept the cabin. Dozens of phones were still pointed at her. Hundreds of thousands of eyes beyond them waited for her response. She thought of Robert Fields in Economy, of Margaret's granddaughter who dreamed of flying, of Jalen, who had believed no one would watch his live stream and now commanded an audience larger than most networks. Her inner voice whispered, If you authorize departure without resolution, they will think this was just theater. If you wait, they'll see real change. She picked up her phone, dialed quickly, and put it on speaker. The voice of the General Counsel, Margaret Foster, filled the cabin. Dr. Morgan, we have drafted the initial framework for immediate reforms. Would you like me to outline them for the passengers? Yes, Althea said. Steady. Transparency begins now. The council read, effective immediately. Atlantic Sky will implement mandatory anti-bias training across all divisions. All employees in customer-facing roles will undergo recertification within 60 days. We are instituting an anonymous reporting system accessible via QR code at every gate, cabin, and service desk. Furthermore, a $100 million dignity fund will provide restitution to passengers experiencing discrimination. The cabin erupted in applause. Phones shook as passengers tried to capture the moment. Jalen's viewership surged past 250,000. But Althea wasn't finished. Margaret, she said, include quarterly audits with public dashboards. No reform without accountability. Consider it done, the council replied. The applause grew louder, now joined by cheers from economy. Some passengers wiped tears. Others shook their heads in awe. Still, inside, Althea's mind churned. She wondered if she had traded her own peace for perpetual vigilance. Would every flight she took now be shadowed by the expectation of leadership? Would she ever again be seen as just another traveler? At 9:05 p.m., Jalen turned the camera back on himself. His voice trembled. I think we just watched history. Dr. Morgan didn't just defend herself. She defended all of us. I'll never forget this. The comments scrolled faster than he could read. She's the Rosa Parks of the skies. This is how industries change. Someone make sure she runs for office. Althea closed her eyes briefly, exhaustion slipping through her bones. She thought of her quiet home in Atlanta, of the garden she rarely had time to tend, of the simple peace she longed for. And yet here she was, cast unwillingly into the role of reformer. Her heart whispered, you didn't choose this, but maybe it chose you. At 9:07 p.m., Patricia approached her with the iPad. Dr. Morgan, CNN requests a live statement before departure. Do you want to address them? Althea opened her eyes. She nodded once. Yes. Put them through. The cabin erupted in flashes as passengers raised their phones. Somewhere, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, waited to hear her words. And for the first time, Dr. Althea Morgan accepted the full weight of her role. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the voice of every silenced traveler who had been told they didn't belong. At 9:10 p.m., the cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight crew routed an external video connection through Althea Morgan's phone. CNN's live broadcast screen flickered into view on passengers' devices, and Jalen Brooks's live stream surged again. 280,000, then 300,000 viewers. The world was no longer just watching. It was waiting. Patricia Lynn held the iPad steady in front of Althea. Dr. Morgan, you're live, she whispered. Althea inhaled slowly, steadying her breath. Outwardly, she sat with calm authority, but inside, nerves tightened like a wire. She had spent her career delivering keynote addresses, testifying before committees, negotiating billion-dollar mergers. Yet this moment felt heavier than all of them combined. Tonight, she wasn't representing shareholders. She was representing every silenced passenger who had been told, in words or actions, that they didn't belong. The anchor's voice came through. We are joined live from Atlantic Sky Flight 227, where board chair Dr. Althea Morgan has confronted a discrimination incident that has captured national attention. Dr. Morgan, can you tell us what happened on your flight tonight? Althea leaned slightly toward the screen. Her voice was calm, deliberate, every word measured. I boarded tonight as a paying passenger, not as an executive. I was told I didn't belong in my seat. My boarding pass was crumpled and tossed aside by a crew member who judged me not by my ticket, but by her assumptions. That humiliation was painful. But what matters is what came after. We cannot allow dignity to depend on recognition or titles. Respect is not conditional. It is a right. The anchor nodded gravely. And what do you say to those who argue this was an isolated incident, a misunderstanding, rather than proof of systemic issues? Althea's eyes sharpened. An isolated incident does not create 47 prior complaints against the same employee. An isolated incident does not mirror the countless testimonies from passengers tonight who shared their own experiences of doubt and dismissal. What we are confronting is not a single act, but a pattern, one that thrives in silence. Tonight, silence was broken. Applause rippled through the cabin. Some passengers wiped tears. Margaret Hale and 2B whispered, "Amen." The anchor pressed on. Dr. Morgan, you've already announced sweeping reforms. Can you outline them for our viewers? Althea nodded. Effective immediately. Atlantic Sky is implementing mandatory bias recognition and de-escalation training for all employees. We are establishing a $100 million dignity fund to support passengers who experience discrimination. We are introducing anonymous reporting systems and quarterly public audits. These changes will not remain internal. They will be visible to the public, because accountability requires transparency. The anchor leaned forward on screen. That is unprecedented. Some critics say such sweeping reforms could cripple profitability. What is your response? Althea's tone remained steady, but her words carried quiet fire. Profitability without dignity is exploitation. The evidence tonight shows the opposite. When leadership chooses accountability, trust grows, and so does value. Already, our investors are responding positively. Choosing dignity is not charity, it is strategy. The cabin erupted again in applause. Phones buzzed with breaking alerts. Jalen's live stream climbed to 320,000 viewers. His comments filled with praise. She's flawless. This is leadership. But in the flood of admiration, darker comments appeared too. A user wrote, "She's exaggerating. Just play the victim card." Another, "This is reverse discrimination." Jalen hesitated, scrolling quickly past them, but he knew Althea would face as much backlash as praise. Althea continued, "This is not about me. This is about every person who has ever been told they don't belong, who has been treated as suspects simply for existing. Tonight, we make a promise that on Atlantic Sky, and soon across the industry, dignity will be non-negotiable." The anchor paused. Dr. Morgan, one last question. What do you hope passengers, employees, and the public take from this night? Althea's gaze softened. For the first time, the steel in her voice gave way to vulnerability. I hope they take this truth. Humiliation can break a person, or it can break a system. Tonight, I chose to break the system. The cabin filled with thunderous applause. Passengers in economy cheered. Even Captain Alvarez stepped into the aisle to clap. Jalen's live stream hit 350,000 viewers. CNN's feed cut back to the studio, the anchor declaring, "What we just witnessed may be the most significant corporate reckoning in aviation history." Althea leaned back slowly. exhaustion seeping into her bones. She had spoken clearly, firmly, but the weight of what she had said pressed heavily on her chest. What if I've promised too much? What if the reforms crumble under resistance? Her doubt was interrupted by Robert Fields, the construction worker from Economy. He stepped into the aisle, voice shaking. "Dr. Morgan, I just called my wife. She cried when she heard your words. She said our kids would grow up in a world where their father didn't have to feel small at an airport. Thank you. Thank you for giving us hope." Althea's throat tightened. For a moment she wanted to let go of her composure, to allow the tears pricking her eyes to fall. But she steadied herself. "Thank you, Robert. That is why we fight." At 9:20 p.m., Patricia Lynn whispered urgently, "Dr. Morgan, backlash is growing too. Certain pundits are already calling this overreach. They're saying it's theatrics." Althea nodded slowly. "Of course they are. Every step toward justice is painted as too much, too soon, too disruptive. But justice has always been disruptive. Let them talk. We will act." Jalen panned his phone back to himself. "Did you all hear that justice has always been disruptive? That's a quote right there." His comments exploded. "Put it on a shirt. That's history." Claudia Reeves sat hunched, trembling, her eyes hollow. She whispered, almost to herself, "She turned my cruelty into history, and I'll never escape it." Margaret Hale leaned toward her gently. "Perhaps that is what you needed, to see the weight of your choices. Maybe it's not the end for you, child. Maybe it's the start of who you could become." Claudia let out a sob, nodding weakly. By 9:25 p.m., the plane felt transformed. No longer a delay, no longer a humiliation. It was a crucible, burning away old prejudices, forging something new. Althea sat quietly, eyes closed for a brief moment. Inside, the doubt still lingered. But she knew one truth more powerful than fear silence was no longer an option. She opened her eyes, looked at the passengers, at Jalen's phone broadcasting her every breath, and spoke once more. "This is not the end. This is the beginning. Dignity is no longer negotiable, and we will not turn back." Applause thundered again. Phones buzzed. The world was listening. At 9:30 p.m., the cabin of Atlantic Skyflight 2 Hawaii buzzed with the aftershocks of what had just unfolded. Passengers were still whispering, still refreshing their phones, still digesting the fact that they had witnessed a corporate transformation mid-air. Yet beyond the cabin walls, beyond the sealed fuselage of the Airbus 350, a storm was already gathering. Cable news panels lit up with chyrons screaming board chair versus flight crew reform or overreach. Conservative commentators accused Althea Morgan of weaponizing identity for attention. Others called her a hero. Twitter splintered into factions, some praising her courage, others mocking her as overdramatic. Patricia Lynn held her iPad, reading incoming alerts from headquarters. "Dr. Morgan, CNN reports supportive coverage, but other networks are calling this a publicity stunt." One senator is tweeting about political correctness run amok. The backlash is rising. Althea nodded slowly, her fingers drumming lightly against her bag. Outwardly, she looked calm, but inside, doubt coiled like smoke. Did I move too fast? Did I promise too much? She thought of her daughter, Layla, a freshman in college, who had texted her earlier, "Mom, are you okay? I'm proud of you." That pride was a lifeline, but it also felt like a weight. What if I fail, and she sees me fall? Daniel Whitman, the VP of Marketing in 1A, leaned toward her. "Dr. Morgan, With respect. You'll need to brace yourself. Crisis comms can stabilize markets, but culture wars, they can swallow leaders whole. Althea tilted her head. Do you think dignity is a culture war, Mr. Whitman? Or is it simply humanity? He hesitated, then smiled faintly. When you put it that way, it sounds simple. But you and I both know the world doesn't treat it as simple. Meanwhile, Jalen Brooks kept streaming. His follower count had exploded past 500,000. Comments scrolled too quickly to read. But a new wave appeared: accusations, skepticism, trolls. She's just trying to look good on TV. Another rich exec crying victim. Cancel her. Jalen frowned at the negativity, glancing nervously at Althea. He didn't want her to see it, but of course, she did. Jalen, Althea said softly, don't shield me. Let the truth show itself, even if it's ugly. The boy nodded. His live stream viewers heard her words clearly. The chat filled with responses. She knows. She's strong. Respect. At 9:40 p.m., Captain Alvarez came forward again. Dr. Morgan, ground control reports we are still on indefinite hold. The FAA is monitoring. They want assurance that the situation is stable. It is stable, Althea replied. But inside, her chest tightened. Stable for now. What about tomorrow? Next week, Margaret Hale and 2B reached out, placing a steady hand on Althea's arm. My dear, storms always follow light. Do not mistake the noise for the truth. You spoke with dignity. That's what will endure. Althea met the older woman's gaze. Gratitude flickered in her eyes, but so did fear. What if she's wrong? What if this moment becomes ammunition instead of inspiration across the aisle? Claudia Reeves sat stiff, her career unraveling in real time. She scrolled her phone, seeing her own name trend alongside Man Flight DT7 and OIM's Atlantic Sky Shame. They're crucifying me, she whispered. I'll never work again. Margaret glanced at her but said nothing. Even now, compassion warred with outrage in the older woman's heart. Althea, hearing Claudia's whisper, closed her eyes briefly. A part of her felt pity, but pity could not undo harm. By 9:45, Mum. Althea's phone buzzed with a private call her daughter. Layla. She hesitated, then answered, putting the phone slightly aside to keep her voice private. Mom. Layla's voice trembled. I'm scared for you. People online are saying terrible things. They're dragging your name. I know, Althea said gently. But listen to me, Layla. Noise doesn't define us. What matters is the work we do, the change we build. Do you believe in me? I do, Layla whispered. But do you believe in yourself? The question pierced Althea deeper than she expected. For a moment, she couldn't answer. Tears burned at the edge of her eyes. Some days, child, belief feels heavy. Tonight is one of those days. But yes, I do. When she hung up, she sat silently for a long moment, staring at the seat back ahead. Passengers around her respected the quiet. The cabin hum filled the air like a heartbeat. At 9:50 p.m., Patricia Lynn broke the silence. Dr. Morgan, headquarters has prepared an official statement. They want your approval before release. Althea read the draft. It was polished, safe, sanitized. It spoke of unfortunate incidents, commitment to improvement, and ongoing review. She handed it back. No, it reads like wallpaper over cracks. I want the truth. Say discrimination occurred. Say we are responsible. Say we are changing now. Patricia hesitated. That level of candor could expose us legally. Althea met her eyes. Candor is the only shield we have left. If we lie, the world will burn us anyway. If we tell the truth, maybe they will walk with us. Patricia exhaled slowly. Understood. She began rewriting. At 9:55 p.m., Jalen turned his phone back on himself. Guys, you're seeing history. But not everyone's happy. Some folks want to tear Dr. Morgan down. I just want y'all to know she's not reading a script. She's living this. And if you've ever been doubted or dismissed, you know why this matters. His voice cracked slightly. Sincerity raw. Viewers responded with a surge of supportive comments. Donations poured in through his link for civil rights groups. Althea overheard and smiled faintly. Even the young are carrying this flame. Maybe the backlash won't extinguish it. Maybe it will spread it wider. At 10 hours po, Althea opened her own phone again, scrolling through headlines. She read one out loud for the cabin to hear board chair accused of grandstanding. Another CEO or activist. Can Althea Morgan be both? She lowered the phone, her voice heavy but clear. This is the cost of truth. The world always resists before it yields. Passengers murmured agreement. Some clapped softly. Inside, though, her mind churned. Will my board still support me tomorrow? Will investors hold Will Layla be safe from the hate pouring online? The struggle was real, but so was her resolve. At 10:05 p.m., she stood once more, addressing the entire cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed support and you have witnessed backlash. Both are real. Both will shape what comes next. But I promise you, this we will not retreat. We will not dilute reform for the comfort of critics. The path is harder now, but dignity is worth the cost. The applause this time was quieter, steadier, less of a cheer, more of a vow. In that moment, Althea realized something profound. The backlash was not proof of failure. It was proof of impact. And for the first time that night, her doubt eased just slightly. By 10:15 p.m., Flight 227 was still grounded. The passengers had grown quieter, the initial shock and chatter giving way to weary reflection. Yet outside the cabin, the world had turned feverish. News anchors filled airtime with speculation. One network showed a split-screen Althea Morgan's calm face on one side, the trending hashtag, or Flight T07 on the other. Pundits debated her motives. Is she protecting civil rights, one asked, or staging a power play for attention? Althea listened through her phone's earpiece to the company's press monitoring line. Every 5 seconds, another headline scrolled across the internal dashboard. Atlantic Sky in crisis. Board chair takes on racism mid-flight. Political leaders weigh in, Patricia Lynn whispered urgently. Dr. Morgan, a U.S. Senator has just called for a congressional hearing on discrimination in aviation. Competitors are circling, suggesting their own policies are stronger. Investors are jittery. Althea pressed her palms together, elbows resting on her knees. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Inside her chest, two voices battled. You asked for this when you went public. One voice said, now you've dragged your company into the crosshairs. The other voice, steadier, replied, no, you didn't ask for humiliation. You responded to it. And what is leadership if not stepping forward when silence would be safer? She opened her eyes, calm restored, but not without scars. Patricia, draft our statement, but this time, make it stronger. No vague apologies, no half measures. Patricia nodded, though her hands trembled slightly on the iPad. Yes, Dr. Morgan. Meanwhile, in seat 3C, Jalen Brooks checked his live feed again. Viewer count had surged past 600,000. But alongside the supportive comments, waves of vitriol now poured in. She's just trying to be a victim. Another corporate elite playing the race card? Jalen felt his stomach knot. He wanted to protect her, to filter the noise, but she had already told him not to. So he held the phone steady, his young face determined. "You all keep talking," he said into the camera, "but I'm sitting here, watching her, and she's the realest thing I've ever seen." At 10:20 p.m., Captain Alvarez reappeared at the front of the cabin. His voice was careful, formal. "Dr. Morgan, ground control has asked for confirmation that you are secure and that operations can continue." "I am secure," Althea replied evenly, "but operations will not continue until reforms are in motion." Her words rippled through the passengers again. Some sighed, eager to leave. Others nodded solemnly, understanding they were part of something larger than a flight delay. Margaret Hale leaned closer to Althea. "My dear, history doesn't wait for convenience. The right fight always feels like an inconvenience to someone." Althea smiled faintly, wise as ever. At 10:25 p.m., her phone rang again. This time, it was a private number one she recognized instantly. The voice of Atlantic Sky's largest institutional investor filled her ear. "Althea, this is Jordan Silver. I need to know if you've lost control. The stock is sliding. Competitors are making calls. What is your plan?" Althea spoke clearly, though her chest tightened. "Jordan, we are not losing control. We are seizing it. Short-term volatility will stabilize once the market sees our commitment to reform." There was a pause on the other end. Then Jordan's voice came cold. "You'd better be right. If not, the board won't back you." When the call ended, Althea sat very still. She felt the weight of it press against her ribs. "The board won't back you." It echoed like a drumbeat. For a flicker of a moment, fear whispered, "What if they strip you of your chair? What if you lose it all?" But another thought rose stronger. Then at least you will have lost it. Fighting for dignity, and that is a loss you can live with. At 10:30 EPE, the backlash reached the passengers themselves. A man in row 14 stood and raised his voice. "With all respect, lady, I got a connection to make. My family's waiting in Denver. Why are we all paying the price for this drama?" The cabin tensed. Several passengers looked at Althea, waiting for her to respond. She rose slowly, her presence commanding without raising her voice. "Sir," she said, "I understand your frustration, but this is not drama. It is accountability. If one person's dignity can be stripped away without consequence, then all of us are at risk. Tonight is inconvenient, but tomorrow, because of this, you and your family may fly in a world that treats you better." The man's face softened. He sat down quietly. Murmurs of approval rippled through the rows. At 10:35 p.m., Patricia returned with the rewritten statement. "Dr. Morgan, I've removed the cautious language. It now reads, discrimination occurred. It was unacceptable. We failed a passenger who is also our leader. We are changing immediately." Althea reviewed it, then nodded. "Release it." Within minutes, the statement went live. News networks flashed it across screens. Analysts were stunned. "This is unprecedented candor." One anchor said, "Most corporations deny, delay, or deflect. Atlantic Sky just admitted fault mid-crisis. By 10:40 POWs p.m." Althea's phone buzzed again. This time, it was the office of the Secretary of Transportation. The official's voice was clipped. "Dr. Morgan, your airline will be called to testify before Congress. Prepare yourself." She ended the call and sat back, exhaling slowly. Another wave of pressure. Another battlefield opening. For a moment, the walls of the aircraft seemed to close in. She rubbed her temples, whispering to herself, "One storm at a time." Margaret Hale noticed. "Child, remember storms pass, and sometimes they clear the sky at 10:45 p.m. Jalen looked at her, eyes wide. "Dr. Morgan, do you ever regret being in charge?" The question hung in the air. Althea studied the boy's earnest face. She thought of her daughter, of the sleepless nights, of the weight that came with every title she had ever held. "Every leader regrets it sometimes," she said softly. "But then I remember the alternative. If I weren't here, who would fight? Who would answer humiliation with change?" Jalen nodded, tears shining in his young eyes. By 10:50 p.m., passengers began receiving notifications on their phones. Atlantic Sky stock had stopped sliding. It was climbing back. Social media sentiment was shifting. A headline appeared, "CEO-level candor stabilizes markets." Patricia showed the update to Althea. "Your gamble is working." Althea nodded slowly. "Not a gamble, a conviction." At 10:55 p.m., Captain Alvarez spoke once more. "Dr. Morgan, the tower is asking for your authorization to proceed. We have a weather window closing soon." Althea rose and looked around the cabin. Faces met hers, some tired, some inspired, all waiting. She let the silence stretch, then spoke. "We will depart. But understand this delay was not wasted time. It was history being written. When you tell this story later, remember that you were part of the moment when silence was broken, when dignity was defended." Applause spread again, this time less explosive but deeper, a steady rhythm of hands meeting in agreement. At 11:00 m. Althea gave the nod to Patricia, who relayed to the cockpit. Engines hummed back to life. The aircraft shuddered slightly, preparing to taxi. Yet even as the plane prepared to move, Althea knew the real turbulence lay ahead. Hearings, political attacks, relentless media scrutiny. But she also knew one thing with clarity: retreat was no longer possible. She adjusted her seatbelt, exhaled, and whispered to herself, "Forward." By the time Flight 227 touched down in Denver, the world had already changed. It wasn't just another late-night arrival. It was the landing of a plane that had carried a corporate revolution mid-air. Reporters swarmed the terminal even before passengers disembarked. Camera lights flared against the glass windows. Journalists shouting questions that passengers pretended not to hear. Althea Morgan walked quietly among them, her leather bag slung across one shoulder, her posture steady. She didn't answer questions, but she didn't hide either. Silence was her shield for the moment. Within hours, summons arrived from Washington. She was to appear before a congressional subcommittee on aviation oversight. The date was set for just 3 days later. On the morning of the hearing, the marble halls of the Capitol echoed with hurried footsteps and sharp voices. Althea stood outside the committee room, dressed in a simple navy suit, her hair pulled back. Patricia Lynn walked beside her, carrying a folder so full it strained against the clasp. "Dr. Morgan," Patricia whispered, "they're framing this as both a civil rights issue and a question of corporate governance. Some want answers. Others want blood." Althea exhaled slowly. "Then we'll give them truth. Truth doesn't need polish." Inside the chamber, senators and representatives filled their seats. The chairman struck the gavel, the crack of wood on wood silencing the murmurs. "This hearing will come to order. Today, we examine the events of Flight 227 Atlantic Sky Airlines and the broader issue of discrimination in air travel." Cameras rolled. The room was live on every major network. The first question came sharp. from a senator known for his theatrics. Dr. Morgan, do you deny that your actions disrupted a scheduled flight, inconveniencing over 200 passengers? Althea folded her hands, leaned slightly into the microphone. I don't deny it. Senator, I acknowledge it fully, but I submit that the greater disruption would have been allowing discrimination to proceed unchecked. A flight delay lasts hours. The stain of injustice lasts generations. The room stirred. Some scribbled notes furiously, others sat back, skeptical. Another representative leaned in. Is it true you used your authority as board chair to override the captain and ground operations? Althea's eyes didn't waver. I used my authority to protect a passenger's dignity, my own in this case. But I want to be clear, the authority I exercised was not just personal privilege. It was corporate responsibility. We set policies, we enforce them, and when those policies are violated, leadership must act. Behind her, Jalen Brooks sat in the gallery, invited as a witness. He clutched his phone tightly, not streaming this time, just watching. His eyes tracked every gesture, every word. He was no longer just a teenager with a TikTok account. He was part of a movement now, though he hardly knew how to carry that weight. The questioning turned hostile. A congressman sneered. Some critics suggest you staged this for attention, that you weaponized identity politics for your own gain. What do you say to that? Althea paused, letting silence stretch until the tension grew taut. Then she spoke softly. If I wanted attention, Congressman, I would have chosen a stage where humiliation wasn't the opening act. I didn't ask to be treated as less than human. I responded when it happened, not with anger, but with accountability. That is leadership, not theater. The gallery erupted in quiet applause until the chairman banged his gavel again. Order. Midway through the hearing, Margaret Hale was called as a witness. The elderly woman, dignified in her silver hair and tailored suit, leaned on her cane as she approached the microphone. I have flown for 6 decades, she began. I have seen kindness and I have seen cruelty in the skies. On that night, I saw cruelty dressed as authority. I also saw grace stronger than arrogance. Dr. Morgan didn't escalate the situation. She endured it. And then she used her position not for revenge, but for reform. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what leadership looks like. The weight of her words settled over the chamber. Even the skeptical congressman looked down at his papers, avoiding her gaze. When Jalen took the stand, his hands trembled, but his voice, once shaky, grew steadier as he spoke. I streamed it because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I thought, if the world saw it too, maybe someone would care. I never thought it would go this far. But I'll tell you what I saw: a woman treated like trash, and then that same woman standing tall and changing everything around her. That's the truth. The hearing dragged into the afternoon. Hours of testimony, analysis, questions that were less about answers and more about political theater. Through it all, Althea remained composed, but inside, the battle raged. They want a misstep. Her mind whispered, one wrong word and they'll paint you as unhinged, arrogant, self-serving. She countered her own thoughts. Stay steady. Breathe. Remember, your mother's voice dignity isn't something they give you. It's something you hold no matter what they do. By evening, the chairman leaned forward. Dr. Morgan, final question. Do you believe the aviation industry is systemically biased against people of color? A hush fell. The question was loaded, the kind that could define headlines. Althea could almost feel Patricia's tension beside her. She spoke deliberately. Yes, I believe bias exists, sometimes hidden, sometimes blatant. I have lived it. I have witnessed it. But belief isn't enough. That's why Atlantic Sky has implemented measurable reforms: AI monitoring, body cameras, anonymous reporting, accountability dashboards. We're not just admitting a problem. We're building the tools to fix it. And I invite every airline represented here to join us. The room shifted. Some legislators nodded, impressed despite themselves. Others scowled, threatened by her bluntness. When the hearing adjourned, the gavel echoing one last time, Althea felt her body finally sag with exhaustion. Reporters surged. Microphones thrust forward, but she gave no further sound bites. She had said what needed to be said, outside, in the fading sunlight on the Capitol steps. Patricia caught her arm. You realize you just set a new bar for the entire industry. They'll either follow you or try to destroy you. Althea's lips curved into the faintest smile. Let them choose. Either way, change is coming. As she descended the steps, Jalen hurried after her. Dr. Morgan, he called breathlessly. Do you think it worked? Althea stopped, looking at the boy who had unknowingly turned his phone into the most powerful spotlight of the decade. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Change doesn't happen in a day. But today, we showed the world what accountability looks like. That's the beginning. And for the first time since the flight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. The night after the hearing, Washington glowed with its usual restlessness. Limousines pulled up at hotel entrances, cameras lingered outside restaurants, and news anchors rehearsed their segments on the day's political theater. But in a quiet suite overlooking the Potomac, Althea Morgan sat alone with a notebook on her lap. The city's noise was muffled through double-glass windows, yet her thoughts were louder than any traffic below. She hadn't written longhand in years, not since medical school. But tonight, pen on paper felt necessary. Words deserved weight. She wrote 3 sentences before pausing. Dignity cannot be delegated. Justice must be operationalized. Change must outlive the person who sparked it. She closed the notebook, slid it into her leather bag, and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since the plane incident, exhaustion gave way to something softer: vulnerability. What if it isn't enough? What if the reforms collapse when the cameras move on? Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from Patricia Board approved funding for the Dignity Response Program. Rollout begins tomorrow across all hubs. Another message followed. From Jordan Silver, the investor who had once doubted her resolve. Public response is overwhelmingly positive. Stock has stabilized. You've turned crisis into opportunity. Proud to stand behind this. And then, almost like fate, a third notification, an email from a young employee at Atlantic Sky. The subject line read, "Thank you for seeing us." Althea opened it carefully. I'm a gate agent at Dallas-Fort Worth. For years. I've watched colleagues treat passengers differently depending on how they look or sound. I never spoke up because I was afraid of losing my job. Tonight, after your testimony, I filed my first report, because now I believe something will be done. Thank you. Althea read it twice, her throat tightening. Quiet victories mattered more than headlines. The following weeks unfolded like a storm clearing into sunlight. Atlantic Sky launched its Dignity First initiative, a sweeping package of reforms that reshaped the company from top to bottom. Body cameras rolled out to crews. AI monitoring flagged biased language in real time. Anonymous reporting portals went live. At first, employees grumbled. Some felt spied on. Others felt insulted. I've been flying for 20 years. I don't need a robot to tell me how to talk to passengers. One union rep declared, but within 2 months, complaints dropped by nearly 70%. Passengers noticed the different smiles at the gate. Explanations offered without condescension. Dignity treated not as a perk, but as a baseline. News outlets chronicled the change. The Atlantic Sky model became a phrase in business magazines. Harvard Business School requested materials for a case study. Civil rights leaders praised the reforms, though they cautioned systemic problems require vigilance, not just policies. Meanwhile, other airlines watched nervously. Shareholders demanded answers. If Atlantic Sky can do it, why can't we, asked one activist investor during a United board meeting? By summer, American, United, and Southwest announced similar reforms, albeit with less fanfare. And yet, beneath the corporate noise, the human stories kept surfacing. Margaret Hale, the elderly woman from seat 2B, wrote Althea a handwritten letter on heavy stationery. You reminded me that grace can exist in places designed for speed and profit. My granddaughter watched the live stream with me. She told me she wants to work in aviation law now. You gave her a compass. Jalen Brooks, the teenager whose live stream had ignited everything, found his life transformed. Followers ballooned into the millions. Media requests flooded in. But more than fame, he discovered purpose. With Althea's quiet encouragement, he founded Voices in Transit, a nonprofit that trained young people to document injustices in public spaces responsibly, ethically, and effectively. He often replayed that night in his mind, the moment he almost stopped recording out of fear, the moment he whispered to his phone, "Y'all are not going to believe this." He realized that one act of courage, however small, could ripple into history. For Althea, the transformation wasn't just public, it was deeply personal. She carried herself with composure during interviews, board meetings, and press conferences. But late at night, she wrestled with unease. What if I'd lost control? What if I'd shouted, cursed, fought back the way Rebecca had expected me to? Would any of this have happened? The answer always circled back to the same truth. Restraint was not weakness. It was power, sharpened and deliberate. Quiet strength had done what rage never could. One evening, 6 months after the incident, Althea returned to Atlanta headquarters to deliver a keynote address marking the official launch of the Dignity Fund. Employees from across the company filled the auditorium, with cameras streaming to thousands more worldwide. She stepped onto the stage, the lights warm on her face, and paused before speaking. 6 months ago, she began, I was told to move to the back of an airplane. I was humiliated, profiled, stripped of dignity in front of strangers. What happened next was not the story of my pain. It was the story of our response. Together, we turned humiliation into accountability, and accountability into reform. The audience listened in complete silence. This fund is not charity. It is not apology. It is investment. Every passenger deserves dignity. Every employee deserves training that equips them to deliver it. Every corporation must remember that policies without accountability are just words. Tonight, we commit resources, not promises, to ensure dignity is more than a slogan. Applause thundered, rolling like a wave across the hall. Afterward, Patricia joined her backstage, her eyes shining. You know they're already calling it the Morgan Protocol. Right. Althea shook her head. It's not about my name. If it becomes about me, it dies with me. It has to outlive us. The weeks turned into months, and the months into a year. By the anniversary of Flight 227, the aviation industry looked different. Discrimination complaints across U.S., carriers had fallen by 82%. Customer satisfaction rose. But beyond numbers, there was a shift in atmosphere, an unspoken expectation of respect, as if passengers carried an invisible shield of accountability every time they boarded. On the anniversary itself, Althea returned to Denver International, to the same concourse where it all began. She didn't arrive with fanfare. No cameras, no speeches, just herself, Patricia at her side, and a quiet bouquet of white lilies in her hands. She placed the flowers at the entrance to Gate C-17, where a small plaque had been installed in honor of the passengers and crew of Flight 227, whose witness and courage sparked systemic change in aviation. For a moment, Althea let herself breathe. The memory of humiliation still burned, but now it was wrapped in something larger purpose. A little girl tugged her mother's sleeve nearby, pointing at the plaque. "Mommy, what happened here?" Her mother bent down, whispering something Althea couldn't quite hear, but she caught fragments. Respect. Everyone matters. One woman made them change. The child nodded solemnly, her small fingers brushing the plaque as if it were sacred. Althea turned away, her eyes moist, and whispered to herself, "That's enough." Because legacy wasn't about power retained. It was about dignity restored. And somewhere in that concourse, amid the shuffle of rolling suitcases and the buzz of boarding announcements, history lingered, not loud, not boastful, but permanent. Some stories end when the plane lands, but this one carried far beyond the runway. Dr. Althea Morgan showed the world that dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. She turned humiliation into reform, silence into accountability, and fear into a legacy of hope. Her journey reminds us of something vital. Prejudice may wound us, but it does not define us. True power lies in responding with courage, restraint, and vision. And while an airline changed its policies, what truly changed was the way millions of people saw themselves no longer invisible, no longer voiceless. As we close this chapter, let us carry her message forward to treat every life with respect, to confront injustice even when it's inconvenient, and to believe that one person's courage can reshape an entire industry. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we'll continue to tell the stories that demand justice, stir compassion, and keep us waiting for the next flight toward change.